さあ行こう。
Earlier this year, a new Sword Art Online game was announced, and it primarily features a multiplayer mode, raiding bosses and dungeons with 20 players. As it was announced, of course I got excited and looked forward to playing it. I mean, it's Kirito and the gang, right? I knew there were a lot of Sword Art Online games, but this is my first and probably entry to the series. This is JJ-kun bringing you my review of Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream. Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream, developed by DIMS and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment, is a multiplayer hack-and-slash action RPG made for modern consoles and PC. Its main selling point? The multiplayer aspect. Seeing trailers and footage of the game, it seemed to be a great experience of what the world of Sword Art Online really feels like. Unfortunately for me, I forgot to register for the closed beta test, so I had to wait for the open beta test to finally start, and that just actually made me even more excited for the full game. Little did I know that all Sword Art Online, just gonna call it SAO from here on out, video game titles are connected and are dubbed by the fans as Gameverse, as it follows its own canon, and Fractured Daydream is the latest installment, serving as the 10th anniversary celebratory game for this franchise. Unfortunately though, if you're like me who wants to enter the world of SAO Gameverse's story and lore through Fractured Daydream, it's to my regret to inform you that this game is actually a standalone game, and while it has references to the previous games and the light novel, it actually mainly follows the anime timeline. The game starts with Quinella, or Administrator, joining your party in Game Online, or ALO, or ALO, I'll just call it ALO from here on out, even joining Kirito in the real world only to be attacked by, well, Quinella, who magically summons his Dark Repulsor and Elucidator, the dual swords of Kirito, which made him realize that the events currently happening were not possible to happen in the real world and is only possible in a digital world, a VR full dive world. Both being confused about what was happening, the two decided to make a truce to figure out what actually was happening. Later on, they met two individuals, Fuka and Neji, the original characters of the game, who were also the ones who introduced where they are and explained what was happening. Galaxia, or Galaxia, however you want to pronounce it, the setting of the game had an error leading to different worlds and different timelines getting merged. Soon thereafter, the party was attacked by Leafa, seemingly under a spell, only to be broken by Kirito. From there, they decided to figure out what was happening to Galaxia and hope to solve and bring everything back to the way it was. The game starts very slowly as it tries to spoon-feed you every information you need to know to understand the game's story. In addition to this, the characters in the game were all sent to different locations in the game setting, so it took a while for all the characters to eventually meet up. If I were to compare it to a different game, I'd say it's quite similar to how Square Enix handled Kingdom Hearts 3's story. The earlier parts up to the middle parts of the game feels like a filler, only for the heavier fluff to be dropped down on you by the latter half. Although just like Persona 3, that's when the story actually becomes good. Initially, the plot seems to be very basic and very easy to follow, so I became more focused on S-ranking every mission on normal difficulty for achievement purposes. Because, I thought the game, the story didn't need no brain to understand, but, the latter part of the story, however, is when you need to actually stay tuned with the story with how they handled, delivered, and executed it. The game kept everything hidden until a plot point is necessary and made sure that you will not be spoiled, nor be given any hints as to what will happen throughout. Or I guess it would be more appropriate to say, misguided. My problem with the story is how short it was. If I were rushing the story, I can probably finish it in 4 or 5 hours? Because there isn't really a lot of chunk in the story, and the only thing making the story progression long are the gameplay sequences that aren't really enjoyable to play as a single player. Since, you can't recruit online players when doing the story, though you are accompanied by CPUs. The developers also mentioned that the game story will take about 20 hours to finish, and I'd say it's about right. If you're S ranking it in normal difficulty, that is. It took me about 35 hours to finally finish the story since I had to repeat some of the missions as I fell short with the score required to S rank a mission, which requires 50,000 points. That, or I get disconnected. I'll talk more about this later. It was also quite interesting to see the interaction of different characters with each other, especially those that were the antagonists of different arcs. Some were goofy, some were edgy, and some were definitely just cringy. It actually made me feel secondhand embarrassment. If this were any other game, I'd say that the graphical art style of this game feels like a PlayStation 3 game. However, I understand why they went for this style, especially that the different titles of the Sword Art Online video game franchise have had different graphical art style given that of the mood, setting of the game, and different developers of each game vastly differing from each other, leading to having different directions. All that said, I'd like to point out that this art style worked in the favor of Fractured Daydream since no one in the game felt out of place and it seemed like everyone was meant to be in this world. It's vibrant, colorful, and pops life in it. It's also even more justifiable once you've seen the in-game cutscenes where the art style really shines through. Unfortunately for the two new original characters of the franchise, Fuka and Neji actually feel a little out of place, especially when they have very modernized stylistic choices towards their characters. It feels as though they were from a different game like, I don't know, Fire Emblem Engage. Luckily, there is actually a canonical explanation for this, just not explicitly stated. The UI definitely reminds me of Fatal Bullet. I know I said I haven't played any other games, but I have seen footages. And you know, to no surprise as well, since it's by the same developers. They've also had some updates towards the design of the UI, which now looks cleaner. As for the enemy design, I like how there's variety of enemies in the game. However, as much as there was variety, the subclasses of these enemies were mostly just resized and recolored versions of the original, much like how beat-em-up arcades did back in the day. Same enemy, but the recolored versions are bulkier, stronger versions. The ones with the biggest changes towards the original design were the world bosses, or mid-bosses in the case of this game. It was quite nice to finally take on Sword Art Online bosses though. I get that the game needs variety of enemy types, but for me, this is quite a lazy way to do it. If this were an arcade game, I would probably understand it. Finally, I'd like to point out the environment. One word: amazing. The lighting, the environment, the debris, nothing feels out of place. If there's any complaint I have with the environment, it's that some stages were definitely a reskin of earlier stages. However, in contrast to my comments with the enemy design, at the very least, these reskins of some parts of the stages have had newer mechanics and gimmicks in it, like breakable walls. These are those that you wouldn't notice much, especially if you are heavily focused on playing the game, however, so it's not really a deal breaker. There's a bunch in Fractured Daydream in terms of original soundtrack. Unfortunately, you won't notice 60% of it since by the time you are playing the game, whether in story mode or online mode, you will be listening to the same music over and over, which will make the BGM or background music quite annoying to listen to. I know it made me annoyed. However, on certain cutscenes, that's when you'll notice they're using a different music, which leaves for a feeling of freshness, allowing you to appreciate the original soundtrack even more. And speaking of the original soundtrack, the game has a bop of a TV-sized cut opening theme named Our Song, sung by Riona, which is quite fitting for the anniversary celebration of the Sword Art Online game project, which brings everyone in, and for the plot of the game. The sound effects of the game is something you take notice as well, as it really makes the game feel alive. However, you can feel the heaviness of each attack that you will deal to the enemies, including buffs and charges, but unfortunately, given that you never play alone and will always play with 19 other players or CPUs if they need to, fill the slots, these sound effects will overlap each other. You will most likely appreciate the sound effects on story mode or on the first segment of each map where you are alone with your party before meeting up with other parties. On a personal note though, there is one sound effect in the game that really haunts me because of a different game. When you attack those healing pebbles or block pebbles, whatever that enemy is named, it has the same sound effect as Nine-Tail Naruto's attack in Naruto Shippuden Clash of Ninja Revolution 3.
I know I needed to get away and all, but I think I may have overdone it.
It's been more than 10 years, but it still haunts me. The game is heavily reliant on its online functionality that even the simplest features are internet connection bound. This is one of the biggest flaws of the game for me. The only feature it has that you can play offline is the story mode, and one more mode that you can unlock after playing the story mode. Everything else is locked behind online connection, which leads me to fear that there's definitely going to be a day when people won't be able to have the full Fractured Daydream experience. Furthermore, it also doesn't help that the game is in constant communication with the servers, even when you're playing story mode. So the slightest flake in your connection would disconnect you from the game servers, requiring you to do the entire mission from the top. Along with shorting the final score, this is one of the issues I've experienced as to why it took me almost 35 hours to finish the story. That said, I'd like to talk about the controls of the game. It's actually quite intuitive, easy to control and grasp. If you played any other action RPG or action adventure games, picking up Fractured Daydream will be a piece of cake. Even during the closed beta test, it was easy to utilize the advanced skills, the ultimate, and chaining them all together as well. Unfortunately, there are definitely times that pressing buttons don't do anything. About 1 out of 10 times. It won't respond to your input at all, which leads to dropping your combo. It's bad because 1, it's generally a bad experience to experience this in a game, and 2, sometimes an objective in boss raids is to get the highest combo count for additional XP by the end of the mission. That, or being unable to get the final hit to the boss. One thing that I found in a bit of a gray area, one that I can't say is bad or good, is locking characters behind story mode. You need to play at least 60% of the story in order to unlock all 21 characters to use them in multiplayer modes. Again, not every character is unlocked from the get-go. You have to unlock them in story mode, or rather by playing the story mode to be able to use them on multiplayer modes. I can't say it's bad since I grew up in an era of video games without DLC and you just have to unlock characters through a specific method, or doing arcade multiple times like in Tekken, nor can I say it's good since the game was primarily marketed as a multiplayer game. I was even expecting to log in on the game and wreak havoc online, only to find out there's only 4 characters in the game and everyone else is locked. Fortunately, you can choose to skip everything in the story on story sequences and do the bare minimum performance in story mode in order to rush through just to unlock everything. Or better yet, it would be nice if there was a way to unlock characters while playing the game through multiplayer sessions, right? That would have been great, honestly. Speaking of unlocking things, most of the costumes that you may use for different characters are also locked within world bosses in story missions. So if you'd like to be stylish, there's only 2 ways of doing it. 1, defeat world bosses in story missions, or 2, get lucky drops in multiplayer modes. But even then, it's quite limiting. Costumes aren't the only thing that you need luck with to get. All weapons, equipment, and accessories are also obtained in-game via luck. It's like gacha, but without the things that make a gacha game a gacha. You can run through co-op, boss raids, or free roam mode to gather random equipment drops, and its subsets or equipment skills similar to Hoyoverse titles are also randomized. Fortunately, there's a special effect and dismantling feature which allows you to move substats or equipment skills to another equipment. Moving those aside, it's a game that I thoroughly enjoyed, especially when playing online, whether with random people or with friends. There's only a few multiplayer games that I can play without getting competitively stressed out, and this is one of those. It's a very casual experience where everyone is completing the same goal. That's the game loop. As mentioned earlier, you'd feel freshness in every stage as each has different objectives, enemies, and bosses. Furthermore, you can play as different characters for the franchise as well, definitely giving out highlights to the characters we've met in the franchise instead of just Kirito. One of the biggest questions that lies for this game is that while it's an amazing Sword Art Online game, is it really worth its price? 2,399 pesos for the base game is no joke, and it only goes higher with the Deluxe Edition and Premium Edition at 3,399 pesos and 3,899.99 pesos respectively. For me, as much as I really recommend this game for all SAO fans, that price tag is a little bit too steep for what it's offering. As mentioned earlier, there's only the story mode and another unlockable mode for the offline session, and for everything else, you would need an active, steady online connection, which also means that the online service for the game will eventually shut down. And if you're playing on consoles, you still have to subscribe to your respective online subscription to play this. I'm not going to recommend this to anyone to get this game at this price tag. If you want to get this game, just wait for a sale. Besides, it's Bandai Namco. Just like Capcom, they're almost always on sale. Just maybe not on the next sale since the game just released. Furthermore, I know a lot of people are forced to choose one between this or Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and a huge factor is the number of players playing the game. If I were to choose one, I'd just get Sparking Zero first, but if you can get both, why not? Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream is definitely not a perfect game, and it's definitely not a game for everyone, but at the very least I can say that it is a fantastic Sword Art Online experience. Sure, it has some flaws, but those do not stop me from enjoying playing a game from a franchise I love. My only wish for this game is for its online service and server to have a very long lifespan so that more Sword Art Online fans would be able to experience playing the game. As I'm writing this, maybe it's actually canonical that the game is mostly online only, since, full dive VR titles in the world of Sword Art Online are online only, right? I'll laugh at my joke.